I think we're going to move into more specialized solutions to where companies or fleet operators are going to start offering things that are tailor-made for specific use cases, workspaces in the car, long haul spaces in the car,
Mm,
sleep beds in the car, right? These sort of room on wheels get
yeah.
transformed from the car form factor to a specialized form factor that is then tailor-made for the demand for that specific form factor, if that makes any sense.
Farzad Mesbahi has been a Tesla investor since 2012 and worked at the company from 2017 to 2021. In 2021, though, he launched his YouTube channel, which has grown to more than 300,000 subscribers and over 120 million lifetime views, covering self-driving, AI, tech, and the broader Musk ecosystem. While Tesla remains a core focus of his, he also explores adjacent topics whenever they spark his curiosity. Farzad, how are you doing today?
Good. What an intro. I didn't even know those stats, bro.
You know what?
What
I
an
had a
intro.
feeling you might know those stats, but as a fellow YouTuber, I always like to scope out other YouTubers, and I use a program called TubeBuddy, so it shows me lifetime
Love it.
stats and views, and so then when someone like you invites me onto their channel, I can say, "Oh shit, this guy reaches 2 million people a month. I better say yes."
I
Right?
love it, man. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited. Super, super
Yeah.
excited.
Definitely. No, I'm
Yeah.
excited to have you on, and we'll get into everything that you know and your background. But I mean, let's start at a high level. Is it safe to like? How do you describe yourself? Are you a Tesla fan? Are you a Tesla expert? What do you call yourself? What do people call you?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's one of those things where it's this thing has morphed over time. I would definitely consider myself a Tesla fan. I would consider myself a Tesla expert. I'm a Tesla investor. I used to work at Tesla. It's like for me, it's one of those things where I've been following the company, have been part of that story for so long that it's
Mhm.
almost like, and I've tried in the past to like get away from the story on purpose, and I
Yeah,
literally can't because it's too fascinating.
yeah,
I think it's one of those things where for me, I'm in a very unique position where I can document the story arc of the story and really get myself into the weeds of the details because there's such a huge audience that's interested in it. And so and that's literally what my YouTube channel, my audience is, and my sort of different media outlets are on X, on YouTube, on my website. It's just me covering that story closely and all the adjacent stuff as well. And living in the Austin metro area, I get to experience their technology firsthand with the Robotaxi. They have the Giga factory here. And so as much as I try to step away from this thing, I just can't. Maybe I'm a little bit on the spectrum. I don't know. Who knows?
yeah,
But it's too hard for me to separate myself from it's just too fascinating. And so I'm
yeah.
super excited to sit here and talk to you about it for sure.
Yeah, well, and I think from an entrepreneurial and a content creator point of view, I mean, maybe after 10 years, you might get a little tired of covering Tesla, but they also do a lot of other adjacent things, like you
They
mentioned,
do.
right? And of course, Elon Musk, with SpaceX, with the Boring Company, and now they're doing humanoid robots. I don't know if we'll talk about all that today, but I kind of
Yeah,
imagine that it is a natural, it's like you can only talk about Tesla, Robotaxi so many times, but hey, there's all these other adjacent topics that
you
sometimes
got it.
tie in pretty closely, right?
Yep, exactly right. And that's exactly it. It's sort of the company has morphed from this auto only story back when it launched with the Roadster to the with the Model S and the Model X, and then over time it sort of morphed into this, physical AI company that also has an energy sector that's tied to it, that's going to
Yeah.
power a lot of it as well. And of course, once you start delving into that and how AI is changing our world, not just with self-driving cars, with again human robots and everything, it just really expands your way of thinking around what does society look like if all these
Yeah.
technologies actually come to fruition. They're very foundational at the core: energy, transportation, labor. And so when
Mhm.
you start thinking about those systems, you're like, okay, what is possible? If you turn the dial up to 100 and say this is definitely going to happen, what does the world look like? And then the world looks crazy. The world
Yeah.
looks crazy. And so, yeah,
Yeah. And I mean, also, I kind of forgot you lived in Austin Metro. That's
yeah,
sort of probably a nice little bonus since a lot of things are happening there. But you
yes.
also worked at Tesla. Do you think that gives you a lot of credibility or extra insight or just kind of nice to have?
For sure. No, it was transformational in my way to really understand the core competency of the company.
Hmm.
And what I really stepped away with from a knowledge perspective that helped me not just build conviction and, as an investor, but also to really understand how this company is so unique is the mission statement of the company plus the culture that the company has adopted, plus that singular leader at the top who is very controversial, but
Hmm.
is very good at getting stuff done at a very large scale. I was
Yeah.
able to experience that firsthand, and it sort of gave me a brand new appreciation to like, okay, you can't have really big companies that move really
Yeah.
fast where everybody's bought in. And that sort of was like, okay, that's a big lesson I'm never going to forget. And it was extremely painful, blood, sweat and tears next
Mm,
level, but it was very worth it because it sort of reinforces this fact of like when people really care about something, they get it done.
mhm.
And that's what I experienced. I was very fortunate to be there, honestly. I really was.
Yeah. So we already have our first piece of swag that we can create after this. Controversial, but gets things done. I kind of like
Yes.
that quote.
Yeah, just as the many great people in history. I mean,
Yeah.
that's such a defining characteristic. Controversial, but they get
Yeah.
stuff done. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that I like about you is that, you're not afraid to criticize areas of Tesla. Like I think obviously there are a lot of Tesla, it's a polarizing company. So I'd say there's a lot of fans and a lot of haters.
Sure.
What do you think about the larger Tesla ecosystem and how people think about the company and like how do you fit in and kind of from your media perspective too?
Yeah, I'm definitely biased towards the positive, obviously. I
Mhm.
mean, I think if you just watch my channel, you can see that I'm very, I'm positive about the product. I
Yeah.
personally think they have the best all-around product on the road from a car perspective, a vehicle perspective. I'm not
Yeah.
going to get into the details why, but that's just my take, just having experienced that vehicle and a bunch of other vehicles as well. But I understand why people would be turned off by it. I
Mhm.
understand the sort of the weaknesses that the brand has. Like historically, it's been, hey, the trim is poor quality,
Yeah.
rattles and creaks and brand new technology.
Yeah.
Service was a huge problem when I was at the company because we were ramping up. At the time when we used to work there, we were ramping up the service
Yeah.
capacity of the company, and people were waiting for months to get their car fixed. Obvious weakness. Now,
Mhm.
as the company has matured, a lot of the product specific things have gone to the wayside,
Yeah.
and it's more about like brand. It's more about, okay, do I want to see myself in a Tesla? Do I want to see,
Mhm.
myself there? I mean, if I think about the broader sort of spectrum of like Tesla and the how people perceive it, you definitely have like 10% to 20% on either side that are
Right.
either fanatical or will never see themselves in a Tesla. But then the middle 80 to 60% are just people that are like, okay, it's like, what's my bang for the buck? What's the
Mhm.
value
Yeah.
proposition here? Is it going to make me happy? Is it not going to make me happy? I don't really care what other people think. How does it fit into my lifestyle? That's where the story is very fascinating because from a
Mhm.
value proposition perspective, it's hard to deny just how much value their vehicles can sort of
Yeah.
give the user, and also the technology stack that they're building behind it that's going to power things like robotaxi and humanoid robots. So
Yeah.
it's just, and that makes for a very fascinating story. You never run out of stuff to talk about because of that dynamic.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good sort of overview too. And I think sometimes one of the things I want to try and do with this conversation is kind of inject some objective numbers, metrics too, because I think you're
Yeah.
a Tesla expert. I know you've talked about in the past about, the technology and, even sometimes like I think I saw a stat the other day, Waymo, we'll talk about Waymo versus Tesla, of course, today, but, I think I
Yeah.
saw, oh, they're up to 2,500 cars. And it was either you or someone tweeted, Tesla makes 5,000 cars a day. And I said, oh,
Yes.
wow, that's kind of interesting. So when you think about there's certain objective measures that you can kind of judge companies on and we'll obviously have lots of subjective today too, but I'm hoping we can
Sure.
dive into some of the objective things today too. Are there any other stats that kind of come to mind when you're talking about Tesla and kind of
Yeah.
like things that excite you about the company?
Yeah, I mean, I will say some of the stats that are fascinating to think about the company is that they went through a massive ramp up phase from 2012 through 2021, 2022,
Hmm.
where they went from about 10,000 cars per year to almost 2 million per year now. Now
Yeah.
that 2 million number has been sort of stagnant in the last 2 to 3 years, partly because of, we had a COVID supply chain shock that we went through.
Yeah.
Then you had an affordability crisis because of inflation. Then you had some brand damage stuff with the Tesla stuff that we don't have to sort of, go through and revisit. But there's also this part of the Tesla story where their best-selling car, the Model Y, is either the number one or the number two best-selling car in the world at
Hmm.
an average selling price that's significantly higher than the second
Yeah.
car in the world, right? So you have the Model Y versus I think the Toyota Corolla and all its different variants, the global variants. And so from that perspective, what Tesla has achieved, even though their sales have been stagnant in the last 2 to 3 years, is that they have the best-selling car in the world as an electric vehicle only with little to no advertising in most of the markets that they play in. That's
Yeah.
significantly more expensive than its competing number two and number three. And
Yeah.
so the story there is a value proposition story, which is like, hey, the car is so good, it's so good that people are going to be willing to pay more for it.
Yeah.
They don't have to be told to buy it by an advertising campaign. They just hear from their friends, their families, they see it on the road. Tesla owners are known for being super open to letting people
Right.
try their cars. They want to get like, check this out. Look at
Yeah.
FSD. Look at how how sick it is, and that speaks to how good the product is. Now, the other part of it too is that Tesla doesn't have a truly affordable vehicle, especially in this day and age, that's sub $35,000. I mean, those really don't exist anymore in the West if you really think
Yeah.
about it. You have these like like your little tiny crap cars, I guess I'll call them, 25,000 new. But it's like the value for money you get is not much. The cars are
Right.
super slow. They're just really small. And that's where Tesla has an opportunity in the next few years to really carve out that niche for themselves. But we'll see if they're going to do that or not. It's going to be interesting to see if they're actually going to get into the market. I have a thesis that they will, but
Mhm.
a lot of Tesla fans think that they won't because they're going fully autonomous. But I
Yeah.
still don't think the regulatory environment is there for them to really make millions of like cars without steering wheel and pedals per
Yeah.
year. They're not there yet.
Definitely. No, that's a good overview. And my last question on this before we jump into the autonomous side of things, you
Yeah.
mentioned the 10 to 20% of haters, basically on Tesla. Are there any Tesla critics that you respect that you sort of say, hey, these guys bring up some good points? Because
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like in every industry, you can sort of tell the haters. It's like they'll twist any video, any article, that's just completely negative. But obviously, that, like you said, there are valid criticisms of any company. So who do you like? Who do you respect that's more of on the Tesla critic side?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some folks out there. The two that spring to mind are so Gary Black,
Mm,
he's more on the investing side. And then meet Kevin
mm,
Papath. These two guys are more on
yeah.
the sort of finance side. But what I enjoy about their feedback is that they come from the place of, from my perspective, that they understand what Tesla's doing, but
Hmm.
they are giving their honest take on where they're failing that I might have a blind spot to,
Yeah.
or I just simply disagree with them, right?
Hmm.
And that's very helpful for me because as somebody who's trying to understand the full gamut of what's going on,
Yeah.
that helps me round out my analysis. The problem with the Tesla part though is that there's so much noise. There's
Hmm.
so much just outright on both sides of just outright they can do no wrong, and they are literally the worst company in the world. And
Yeah.
finding the in between is very hard in the
Well, and
in the
that's
age
sort
of
of where
social
it's hard to
media.
argue that they're the worst company in the world if they're selling 5,000 cars a day and,
Oh,
leading in all
exactly.
of these objective metrics, right? So that's sort of where I take a
Yeah,
lot of that with a grain of salt. And, I
exactly.
know one thing, because I've covered Uber, for example, for 11 years, right? And I
Yeah,
always sort of tried, like I probably am more, I'm positive on the company, positive on the industry, but have never had a problem calling out the faults and the criticisms. And I sort of always
yeah,
joke that like if I have haters on both sides, that's how I know I'm doing a good job. Like company thinks I'm too tough
exactly.
on them, and all of the some of the drivers think I'm way too easy on them. I guess one thing with Tesla though, like, are you ever worried, or maybe friends in your circle that are content creators, are you ever worried that Tesla might pull access from some of these events, or some of the coverage, or sort of get
No.
blackballed by Elon? Because I think that's the one fear that I might have covering Tesla. Like if I say a valid criticism, but
Yeah.
Elon sees it and doesn't like it.
Well, what's fascinating is so Elon has been following me for the last couple of years, and
Yeah.
I'm not
And he
afraid
does
about.
reply and retweet you a lot too, I've
He
seen.
does reply and retweet me, but I'm also not afraid of highlighting things that they can do better,
Yeah.
things that I think they're doing
Constructive.
incorrectly, constructive. I'm never, and I think ultimately I have worked at the company. I know how the company works. Like when I used to work at the company, 95% of the time spent was on things that the company wasn't doing well. Because
Hmm.
those are the things we had to fix when I used to
Yeah.
work at the company. So I bring that sort of I bring that sort of mindset, which is you have to be able not just highlight the things that they do well so people understand what they're doing well, but if
Hmm.
something they're not doing well, if you don't share that, like that's a disservice to the company because then they will not be able to fix that.
Yeah.
Like the hardware 3 discussion, this is in the weeds and I'll spend 4 seconds on this.
Sure.
The hardware 3 discussion with their older vehicles that have the older version of the hardware for FSD that right now are not getting the latest updates. Tesla has to figure out how to make those customers right because they
Right.
spent $15,000 for that software suite in some cases, and they're now lagging behind people that are spending half of that on newer
Yeah.
vehicles. Tesla has said they're going to do right by the customers. My take is you should do that as soon as possible, right?
Hmm.
So that's like one big area that I've highlighted, but it's important. It's important for the company to as long as it's constructive and it's not just vitriolic and
Hmm.
illogical. I think there's a lot of value in doing that. There's a
Yeah.
lot of value in doing that, and anybody who follows their respective areas should do that because it's at the service of the thing that you're covering. It's
Yeah.
constructive criticism is the most important thing to get better.
Yeah, well said. All right, so let's dive into the juicy topics now.
Yeah.
Autonomy, robotaxi. You're in Austin, which I think is a nice benefit, as I mentioned. So I know you've been taking a bunch of rides, and I feel like you're one of my go-to experts on all things robotaxi.
Sure.
So I love following your stuff. What's the latest with Tesla's robotaxi program?
Yeah, so they have two areas live right now, and they just got approved for a third. So they're in Austin Metro. They are in the entirety of the Bay Area, and they just got approved for Arizona yesterday in the entire state. And they're probably going to launch in Phoenix, if I were to guess, the Phoenix metro area, which I believe was Waymo's first
Yep.
place, if I can remember
Yeah,
correctly.
kind of easy, spread
Yeah,
out grid.
exactly. Friendly regulations, all that
Yep.
good stuff. Perfect weather. In the Bay Area, they have about 100 cars, is my understanding. They all have safety drivers in them. Even though they're operating autonomously, they still have safety drivers in them.
So they're
In
in the
Austin,
driver's seat.
you got it, correct. In Austin, they have it's tough to tell now because yesterday they just made their iOS app public to everybody.
Hmm.
And so if you download the Robotaxi app on the App Store in an Apple device, you get immediate access to the Robotaxi network in both Bay Area and Austin. But in Austin, they have sort of this like hybrid of safety drivers and safety riders. So they either on the driver's side seat or the passenger side
Hmm.
seat, depending on which ride you get. I think the
Oh,
driver's
so it's
side
both. I
seat
thought it was
guys.
just riders.
No, they went to a hybrid model because I believe
Hmm.
they started testing the highways in the Austin metro area. So I
Got
think
it.
certain drives that you go on the highway, you now get a safety driver because obviously the highways is where you get most of your deaths, and I
Hmm.
think they want to be super comfortable with the safety profile of it. And then they have about 20 to 25 cars, I believe, in Austin. But with that iOS expansion yesterday, that's
Yeah.
going to open up the floodgates for way more customers. So my guess is they're either added more cars to the network as of the last 24 hours, or they're
Yeah.
getting ready to do that. I'm actually going to go downtown tomorrow. I'm going to take a bunch of rides and see if I'm going to get new. There's a
Yeah.
license plate tracker. This is how psychotic the Tesla community is. There's a
Well,
license
that
plate tracker.
yeah, no, that's actually, I mean, we've been reporting on these numbers. There's
Yeah,
a license plate tracker. I'm like, oh, that's kind of a good objective measure. And I
there
think I've
is.
seen 20 to 30. I think one of Tesla's executives mentioned on a call too. I can't remember if they said 20 cars or they might have said 12,000 miles or something. It kind of inferred like a small, like dozens of cars in
Yeah,
Austin. I didn't realize it was up to 100 in the Bay Area though. That's sort of
yeah.
a lot. Is that based off of kind of estimates or what's that number based off
That's an
of?
actual number. So the geography they have in the Bay Area, it's literally the entire Bay Area. So they're
Hmm.
going around the entire Bay Area as the geofence. So they need that many. They launched with 100 actually in the Bay Area, but they all have safety drivers. The company has said they're going to expand to 500, or the goal is, Elon and Tesla and timelines is, that's they're known for this. They have 500. Their goal is 500 in Austin and 1,000 in the Bay Area, and 8 to 10 metro areas open by the end of the year. So that's their expansion plans for the rest of the year. And then for next year, their plan is to be in at least double or more metro areas as they expand Robotaxi. We've seen them testing in places like Michigan, New
Yeah.
York. We saw units in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is a very fascinating sort of
Hmm.
talking point there. I don't know if you want to get into that or not, but yeah. So that's their plans right now, what they have going right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. And I mean, I guess the operating area is pretty large, like you mentioned in the Bay Area, in
Mhm.
Austin, it's sort of right there too. What's the actual experience been like? You've been taking trips. What's it like?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, the
You're still
actual
here.
driving.
So far, so
Yeah,
good.
I'm still here. Or am I AI? You'll never know. No, the driving. So the driving dynamics have been fantastic. They really have been very good. I've taken Waymos, I've taken Ubers, I've taken Robotaxis. I would say that the Robotaxi experience, and I encourage everybody to try this out for themselves. The Robotaxi experience I prefer to the Waymo experience. The Robotaxi feels a little bit more human. It feels a little bit smoother. The app experience is more integrated. So in Austin, for example, Waymo has to go through Uber, whereas
Mhm.
Tesla has their own ecosystem of Robotaxi.
Yeah.
And so in Uber, you have to sort of select to want more Waymos relative
Right.
to human drivers. So it's kind of a crapshoot if you're going to get one. A little bit bigger wait time to be paired with a Waymo. But the big upside that competitors have, so Waymo specifically, is that because they have a lot more cars in Austin, the ability to get paired with one is actually much higher. Whereas
Hmm.
one of the big issues that Robotaxi has had in Austin is wait times.
Yeah.
There was a couple times where I would try to get a Robotaxi, I just can't. I literally can't. They
Yeah.
don't have enough cars relative to the amount of customers they have hailing them. So, but on the flip side, the one benefit that Tesla has is because the approach they've taken for self-driving, which is vision only, which is empowered by the AI stack where they've been gathering data for the last 7, 8 years through
Hmm.
customers' cars, and the fact that they make almost 2 million cars per year, that scale advantage should allow them to just dump cars in the regions that where they need them once
Yeah.
they hit the safety profile that they're looking for. Once they're like, okay, the system works, we're comfortable with it, we need more customers, or there's a lot more customers to hail our cars. Okay, we need to add 50 cars there. We need to add 100 cars. Whereas a company like Waymo, it's a little bit harder for them because they're dependent on a third-party supplier to give them the cars, which they have to change now because Jaguar is moving away, or Waymo's moving away from Jaguar because they discontinued the I-Pace, and now they're partnering with Zeekr. So Waymo doesn't control the manufacturing process, the supply process, and on top of that, Zeekr is going to be limited to 10,000 units per year at best by the end of 2026, 2027, whereas Tesla has a goal to manufacture 4 million cars per year by the end of 2027. And
Yeah.
so if Tesla achieves the safety profile and the technological aspect of the self-driving thing, which I feel very confident that they will, especially
Hmm.
after the latest update of FSD, they should be able to just pick a spot, get the safety profile that they're looking for from a data perspective, and once they get that, they just overrun the area with
Yeah.
robotaxis. Yeah.
Yeah, Waymo just announced a new fleet size, as I mentioned, alluded to earlier. They've got
Yeah.
2,500 vehicles in the United States. They've got 200 in Austin. So they initially launched with 100. They've got 200 now. And like you mentioned, yeah, so it's Waymo on Uber. So you can only get one through the Uber app. So that's one big difference there. Now, you mentioned if Tesla achieves the same safety profile. And I feel like I know you kind of glossed over that, but to me, that's the whole ball game when it comes to
100%.
Tesla versus everyone else, right? I think everything else is kind of just they've got all this capability, they've got, operating areas. Like, I guess, I don't know, I don't know if it's meaningless to me, but I think that's kind of the big metric. So, what are you
Agreed.
looking for? Like, what do you think objectively we would, Tesla, like, how are we going to judge when Tesla achieves the same safety profile as Waymo, for example,
Yeah,
or
so
close
there's going
to
to
it?
be 100%. There's going to be a couple ways to verify this. Number one is with your existing vehicle network. I don't know if you can hear my baby in the background.
No, you're good.
It's okay. The current software they use in their customer cars. So where people go out and buy a FS car, they can download FSD. They have the latest
Right.
versions. Those
So
cars are getting
a new
upgrades.
car, like you said, has hardware 4, and then it'll have what version of software these days?
FSD V14.1.7 is the
Got it.
latest one that's out there right now. So through a lot of data gathering from different sources that are open source, people
Hmm.
can go in and sort of, hey, this is how many miles I go between interventions. That's one way of tracking it, and it's just anecdotal experience by being in the vehicle and using FSD V14. But the bigger one is once Tesla yanks the safety rider and driver from their vehicles, that's when we'll know that they've reached a
Yeah.
safety profile that's acceptable for them to go and actually execute against their robotaxi goals. From my perspective, from a technical perspective, I think they have everything they need to get there. It has taken them way longer than at Waymo
Hmm.
because Waymo, for example, they've used a much more, I call it a brute force approach, where they have a series of sensors, LiDAR, radar, ultrasonics, cameras, and they use a lot of heuristics, so human code to sit down and
Hmm.
sort of account for every single variable that the car could face. And then they also do HD maps of all the areas that they're in to map out every single road and curb and corner and
Yeah.
everything where the car can navigate around that region while knowing every single little detail about it. Where Tesla's approach is much more generalized, and it's
Yeah.
essentially an AI brain that's going to navigate the world instead of being told what to do. And that AI brain is reliant on billions of miles of data that's
Hmm.
fed through an AI computer that figures out how to drive. And so that process by default is going to take a lot longer.
Right.
But once you achieve the safety profile of a competing Waymo, or even better, of a human, or even higher, 2, 3 times, 10 times higher than a human,
Yeah.
then at that point, you're one software update away from just shipping this out to all the cars. And so
Yeah.
that's what Tesla's banking on, is that AI approach, whereas Waymo is much more, in its current format at least, it's much more dependent on a complex suite of sensors and HD maps, which is a proven method. But the
Mhm.
one huge drawback of that is scale because of the complexity.
Right. No, and I think that's one thing that a lot of people miss in the Waymo versus Tesla debate. Like they're
Yeah.
taking completely different approaches. Waymo's sort of up here in cost and complexity and sensors and everything, and they're trying to come down, whereas Tesla's starting at the very bottom when it comes to cost, 8 cameras, right? Things like that, and
Yeah.
then trying to kind of meet Waymo in the middle. So is it controversial to even say that Waymo is ahead of Tesla right now?
I mean, I think they're ahead of Tesla in a bunch of different ways, right? They're
Mhm.
ahead in Tesla from the fact that they don't have safety drivers or riders in the places where they operate. That's open to the customer. They have more cars, way more cars operating as self-driving robotaxis
Yeah.
versus Tesla. They're also in more markets. And now the flip side of that argument would be from that perspective, they're way ahead as actual rides per day. But
Right.
from a technical perspective, I would argue Tesla is miles ahead because
Mhm.
Tesla is optimizing for scale. The
Got it.
optimization for scale is going to be the long-term advantage,
So
in my opinion.
I
Yeah,
think that's the key. They're optimizing for scale. If or
yeah,
when they can flip that switch, they've got the vehicle production, they've got a generalized approach that can
you
launch in
got it.
multiple markets. And I think that's the thing that people kind of miss. So it's like it's kind of a pretty big if or when. And
Huge, huge.
I don't know how to, kind of, make it seem more important than just saying if or when, but like if or when things could be, I mean, they're primed to scale basically, right?
The way I like to frame it, and this is where people call me a fanboy, but I think this is a factual, objective statement. If
Mhm.
Tesla figures out how to get their scale method to a point where it's as safe or safer than a human, they are the de facto robotaxi player in the country because of that scale.
Yeah.
If they can get every Tesla to be as safe or safer than a Waymo, they're not limited by how many cars they can make.
Yeah.
They're not limited by the geography because the geography is already figured out by the AI brain because it's generalized versus it being mapped by region. And so if and when they figure it out, it's going to be very hard to compete against them because they
Yeah.
own the entire manufacturing and supply chain stack.
Got it. So, what do you think about Tesla's robotaxi rollout so far? Kind of with safety drivers and riders in Austin, kind of moving over to the Bay Area now. They, like you mentioned, they've applied and been granted this permit in Arizona. Would you do anything differently, or do you sort of like the approach they're taking?
I think the approach is good. I think they're trying to be safe. From my perspective, I think what I'm looking for is the speed. It's
Hmm.
it's the it's the acceleration of not just the regions that they get into, but the geofence expansion. Because
Hmm.
from the very beginning, the entire approach that they're taking optimizes again, it optimizes for that scale to be able to go really fast. And so for what I'm looking for is the acceleration of the regions that they're going to turn on and the amount of cars they're going to have in that region. I mean, so they launched in June. It's been July, August, September, October, November. It's been 5 or so months. We've had a little bit of a sort of slowdown of how many regions they've gone into and how many cars they
Hmm.
have. And that some of that could be because they don't have enough data to prove out that they're safe enough. Maybe they don't have enough corner cases figured out.
Hmm.
Maybe they were waiting for this FSD V14 version to come through and take it to the next level. I've had it in my Cybertruck for the last 3 days. I haven't had to touch the steering wheel, not even once. And the thing literally goes from driveway to parking spot in a parking lot or
Yeah.
side streets or whatever. Now, Tesla has that software internally for longer than we do. But again, they're waiting. I think from my perspective, what they're probably doing is they're waiting for the safety profile to come through. And if it doesn't match, then we're going to have to wait again. Right.
Yeah.
And so and that's the one thing with the Tesla story that people get really impatient because the solution that they're going for is so novel that it's very easy to say, well, see, I told you it's not going to happen. But in reality, it's like, well, they're the only ones that are doing it this way.
Yeah.
And if they
Yeah.
figure it out, that's where their advantage comes from is figuring it out. Just in the
Definitely.
same way that they figured out EVs at scale or reusable rockets, right? SpaceX, look at this guy's rockets is blowing up all the time. Once they don't, they have a
Yeah. Then
monopoly,
they're pretty good.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been critical of, I mean, any AV company really, other than Waymo, that was sort of, like I kind of joked that my bar was paid driverless rides, and I thought anything else was kind of noise, sort of theatrical. Oh, we're
Sure.
expanding. Oh, we're testing here. Like, I guess to me, like, I don't know. I don't work at an AV company, obviously, but so it's easy for me to sit in my chair and say, but, I see a lot of companies making announcements. And,
Yeah.
I guess like to me, what do you think about Tesla? They're expanding the operating area. And, I see these kind of, I think they're kind of a bit silly, comparisons of Tesla's operating area to Waymo's, but Waymo is doing paid driverless rides. Okay. They have 5 times the operating area, but they don't do paid driverless rides. That's my
Right.
bar to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very fair bar from the standpoint of show me what you're actually doing that proves
Hmm.
that you're a self-driving fleet operating company. I think that's a very fair statement. Where I come from, so I come from an investing background. I come from a background that is trying to identify things that are ahead of time and
Hmm.
saying, okay, here's the likelihood of this happening based on the evidence that I have that this is a defensible moat. right? That's how I
Mhm.
think about companies. That's how I think about my entire life. That's how my brain's wired.
Yeah.
And so from my standpoint, the current time is 100% correct. Your statement of Waymo is doing it and Tesla isn't,
Mhm.
1000% correct. Where I come from is this will not be the case for much longer. And once that's not the case for much longer, it's going the shift is going to be very drastic, very quick, and very sudden to
Yeah.
where you're going to have from one player in Waymo that's doing almost all of the rides to Waymo being just a speck in a matter of 1 to 2 years. That's how I view this shift. And from my perspective, we will know for sure if they're on track to do this sometime in the first half of next year. Like it's
Mhm.
happening. Like it's very this should come down the pike very quickly. And if it doesn't get there and Waymo
Yeah.
keeps expanding even further and faster and Tesla's falling behind, then it requires sitting back down and being like, okay, what are we missing here? What are we missing here? Are we looking at this incorrectly? It's sort of like what is Tesla being misleading? Are they
Yeah.
lying? Or
Well,
is
and
the is the
I
yeah,
think you're onto something. I mean, if Tesla's here expanding new operating areas, I mean, it might be internally more for testing, more for validation, for safety, and fans of the company might look at that and sort of use that for comparisons to Waymo. But I don't really
sure,
actually know, that those could be like two different interests, I guess you would say. You know what I mean? When I see people
sure.
comparing the operating area, Tesla might not care what it has to do with Waymo, but for them, like you said, if they're taking that generalized approach, they want to be able to launch in a city like Austin or LA or San Francisco, and they want to be able to cover the entire region.
You
Whereas
got it.
Waymo will take a slower, more methodical, okay, we'll expand south, now north, now east, right? It's kind
You
of,
got it.
it leans into Tesla's approach.
100 exactly, and you got it right. I think the lens from which people look at this is the most interesting part of it because like I think the way you framed it is so correct. Is like the approaches are very different. It's the same end goal of
Yeah.
self-driving fleet, but the way they've come at the problem couldn't have been any more different. It's
Yeah.
like literally like everything about it
It's
is different.
honestly like the
Yeah,
opposite.
yeah, literally the opposite.
You are in a car,
Yeah,
but it's like everything, and you're getting from A to B without a driver. Those are
yeah.
two things are the same, but every other thing is different.
Which makes
Okay.
which like the from a technology perspective, this is why it's so fascinating. It's
Yeah.
so nascent and early. Like
Mhm.
this is the curve of technology where at the beginning you have a lot of players doing it very differently. Zoox, Waymo, Pony,
Yeah.
Tesla, et cetera, et cetera. But then as the technology matures, there's a convergence to okay, this is how we should all do it. Like
Yeah.
cars when they were first built, the steering wheel and pedal wasn't the first method to get the car from point A to point
Mhm.
B. You had the lever and the things and whatever, and then over time as the technology got better and better and then there was an optimal solution, everybody converged to that. We're at the very beginning of that S curve, and
Yeah.
the S curve is about to go like this in the next 6 months, and that S curve is going to be very fascinating to track for sure.
Yeah. So what do you think about Tesla's current pricing? That's the other thing I see a lot
Yeah,
of people comparing it to Uber, comparing it to Waymo. But I mean, I guess they're kind of probably losing money on a lot of these rides. Should we even look at pricing? Does pricing really matter that much right now?
I think right now it doesn't. I think long term it's a signal that says Tesla is looking to go as the lowest cost per mile provider of
Mhm.
transportation because that's where the scale advantage will actually play in. If you have
Yeah.
all the scale, you better offer this at a low
Well,
price,
I think it's a
Yeah,
given that they'll be the cheapest, right? If or when the technology
correct.
works, right? Because the input costs are so much lower.
Exactly, exactly. And so, but I think right now it's more of a function to try to get people to max the demand of the fleet of the
Yeah,
actual what
that
they're
makes
offering,
sense.
right? I think it's going to be fascinating to see what they do with the pricing once they have the 1,000 cars in the Bay Area, once they have the 500 cars in the Austin metro area. It's going to be very interesting to see where the pricing is relative to everybody else because
Right.
if they're saying, okay, well, we have a lot of demand, we're like our cars are easy to hail, people love the experience, and if that price starts inching up closer to Uber, then the signal that sense, and let's say the safety riders are yanked, right?
Yeah.
What's the signal there? Tesla's about to make a lot of money.
Yeah, that's
you know?
actually a good point. I think when they kind of
Yeah.
get to a fleet, because we have some data on Waymo, right? Waymo, there was a report by a company, Obi, that looked at Waymo's pricing compared to Uber and Lyft. It was 40% more.
Yeah.
And, it took longer to get a Waymo than an Uber, which kind of makes sense. And, riders were kind of happy to wait longer and pay more. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I thought that was kind of interesting. But Waymo's at that fleet size of 1,000 or 1,500 vehicles. That's where, when you're at 1,500 vehicles doing 25 trips a day, if you're losing, $5-10 a ride on that, that adds up pretty quickly. That's sort of when you need to at
100%.
least get close, to maybe not making money, but break even or just losing a couple bucks, right?
Exactly right. And I don't think we're going to see the financials from Waymo for a long time because it is a subsidiary of Google, and Google's
Right.
kind of has in a sort of special projects category. And the reason why they don't share the financials is because it's probably a money losing business, probably a
Yeah.
severely money losing business. But what I would expect, I think the Tesla example is interesting because I fully expect them to share the financials of Robotaxi sometime in the next 12 months. Because if you just sit down and do the math and sort of think about the cost to build a car, the scale of the car, and then once the safety rider is yanked and the safety profile of the car is somewhere around a
Mhm.
human level, then the teleoperator to car ratio should be low enough to where Tesla's able to make, at a dollar per mile cost to the person who's hailing the vehicle, they should be making something like 30-40% margin per mile.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the math on the back end from my
Yes.
perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. So sort of wrapping up here, I have a couple more questions for you, but we talked about a lot about obviously Tesla, Waymo. I think those are the only two companies we've talked about so far.
Yeah.
What do you think about the competitors on the AV side? Are there ones that you're interested in? You're looking at, I mean, there are a lot of companies, right? There's Zoox, pretty well
Yeah.
funded by Amazon. They just launched, public rides in San Francisco. There's smaller ones like May Mobility, Avride. How closely do you track these, or who else are you looking at in the AV space?
Yeah, the ones that I'm most interested in are Tesla, Waymo, and Zoox. I follow those three the most closely. I think the way I view the AV world is through the lens of scale. I think that for the next 5 years, the player with the scale is going to be, from my perspective, winner take most, or even
Mhm.
winner take all in some cases. But how I see the AV sort of landscape moving is that I think we're going to move into more specialized solutions to where companies or fleet operators are going to start offering things that are tailor made for specific use cases. So as regulations catch up or they get slightly modified, workspaces in the car, long haul spaces in the car,
Mhm.
sleep beds in the car, right? And I think that's what we start getting into, is that these sort of room on wheels get
Yeah.
transformed from the car form factor to a specialized form factor that is then tailor made for the demand for that specific form factor, if that makes any sense. But we're not going to be there until like the next decade, I think. So those are the cars I'm actually, like, the companies I'm seeking out. It's like who is going to be the first company that says all
Mhm.
our autonomous vehicles, they all have a desk in them?
Yeah.
Because when you don't have to drive, you can just sit there and work, and
Right.
like a car, a seat with a seat belt and nothing in front of you to put something on there, it's not really the most conducive place to work. But if there's a car that says that's all we're going to do, that becomes a fascinating company to track. What's
Yeah.
what's the technology stack you're using? Are you licensing FSD? Are you licensing from
Mhm.
Waymo? Are you going to use your own, approach to solve for self-driving? That's where the stuff gets really interesting. But I'm not super interested in, like, take existing car and make it into a robo taxi. I think
Well,
I think
so I mean,
outside of Waymo,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean, that's been Waymo's approach, right? Take
yeah,
existing cars. You mentioned obviously they've got the Jaguar I-Pace, the Zeekr,
yeah,
and they're working with Hyundai, the Ioniq 5, take an existing car, retrofit it. Zoox is building it from the ground up, but that's
yes,
also, that's building a very unique car
yeah.
and an AV company. What
And it's
about
a
a
city car
company?
too. It's not a highway car either. It's a city
Yeah.
car because it doesn't have any crumple zones. Yeah,
Got it. What about a
yeah,
company like Wave? I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're sort of a big buzzy one, raised billions of dollars out of the UK. I mean, when I'm thinking what you said, thinking about scale, like I think that I had their CEO on my podcast, Alex, and I think that is their argument. They're building this generalized end-to-end AI approach, right, to self-driving, very similar to
sure.
Tesla, to be frank,
Yep.
and then applying it to all different OEMs, cars, vehicles, geographies. They're doing these big road trips, and they've got a lot of buzz. It's, I mean, like I said, they're still not doing paid driverless rides, but what do you
Yeah.
think about other companies kind of taking that generalized end to end, and they're pretty well funded. So what would you think about a company like that if you're
Yeah.
familiar with them?
Yeah, for sure. I am familiar with them. Yeah, I think their approach, from my perspective, that's the correct long-term approach is a
Mm.
generalized end-to-end neural net system with cameras only, that are, or cameras plus one or two other sensors to really limit the
Hmm.
complexity. That's really going to allow you to compete. I think Wave's biggest, again, I view all this whole thing through the lens of Tesla will be the dominant player very soon. That's how I view it.
Yeah.
That's
How
that's
soon?
sort of my framing. By the end of next year into 2027, I think they will have the most autonomous rides out of anybody by the end of 27. Easily,
Got it.
easily.
So
Yeah,
that's in 2 years.
yeah. They'll have more than 50% of all autonomous miles by then, for sure.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's
You
a
can even yeah.
reasonable
Clip me.
timeline.
Clip me on this one. But so from the lens of that perspective, it's like, okay, so if Tesla does achieve that, the reason why they've achieved it is because they've had, by that point, a decade long sort of run of collecting data around the world, billions of miles to feed them through their AI system.
Yeah.
For a company like Wave to get to the scale of Tesla, they're going to have that many miles to be able to operate in all those places. Now, they could start in London and just do London and dominate London. That's great. That's great. And they could be very successful doing that. But then that becomes a very niche player. And so, and then nothing's stopping Tesla from saying, okay, cool, all the Teslas we've had in London for the last 10 years, okay, cool, now that's our data, turn it on, and then all those cars can drive themselves. And so then that becomes a question of, okay, how will Wave compete when a player has essentially been there globally collecting all this data for a decade that has the AI system to just send it through a software update? And I think that's what a lot of people miss when they think of, again, sort of going back to my sort of the way I view this through that lens, is that whole story gets missed because, when people focus on the now, they're very much behind, but the trend of where it's going, from my perspective, is very clear. And that, from my perspective, is that there's going to be a dominant player that is not currently the dominant player.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely laying out a great bull case for Tesla. And honestly, if I'm a competitor to Tesla, I feel like I might be a little worried here because of everything you're laying out. And it's like, it really is if or when. And when you look at, objectively, right, like Elon's results with all of his companies, I mean, he kind of eventually gets the job done in a lot of these, in basically every area. So I think the next 2 years for sure. I like that timeline. I don't know if it's going to happen overnight or even in the next year, but I do think in the next couple of years, it's going to be very exciting. So Farzad, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all of your knowledge about Tesla, your insights, your expertise, and even, raising a couple points, constructive criticisms for Tesla too. So if folks want to follow you, learn more from you, where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. Super, super fun as always. Farzad on YouTube, Farzad on X @Farziness, or you can go to my website, farzad.fm, and that's spelled FARZAD.fm.
Yeah, I feel like it's nice. You've got a unique name. So I think you can just type Farzad into a Google. Look, I just did it. I just typed Farzad into
Did I come
Google
up?
search and you're all over the place. That's all you got to do.
It used to be a Persian singer. So sorry, bud. Sorry, Farzad. It's my
You're
turn.
number one. All right. Take care.
All right. Thank you.